Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking the fascinating and honestly surprisingly complex world of a total global obsession. I mean, we all love chocolate, right? But have you ever actually stopped to wonder about the hidden differences inside our favorite sweet treat? Like, what makes one bar a gourmet delicacy and another just a simple candy?
Okay, so let's dive right into this by confronting the absolute most common number we see walking down the candy aisle. We always see those labels proudly displaying 55%, 70%, or even 85% cocoa. But what does that number actually measure? And, why does it change your tasting experience so dramatically?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the fundamental building blocks of chocolate. The cocoa percentage you see on a label refers strictly to the total proportion of ingredients derived directly from the cocoa bean. So this is essentially a combination of two things. You've got the cocoa solids, which give us cocoa powder and that classic chocolatey flavor, and the cocoa butter, which is the natural fat extracted from the bean. That's what gives chocolate its rich, melt-in-your-mouth texture. So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're covering 6 key areas today. 1. Decoding cocoa percentages. 2. Dark, milk, and white. 3. Caffeine and theobromine. 4. The health debate. 5. Global standards. And finally, 6. Tempering and tasting. Let's get right to it.
All right, Section 1, Decoding Cocoa Percentages. Let's actually visualize the recipe inside a standard chocolate bar. When you buy a 70% dark chocolate bar, you are getting exactly 70% cocoa ingredients. And again, that means the solids and the butter combined. The remaining 30% of that bar, well, that's made up of sugar and other ingredients, like maybe some vanilla. So the math here is pretty simple, but it's absolutely crucial. A higher cocoa percentage directly means there is literally less room in the recipe for sugar. And that is exactly why a higher percentage results in a much more intense, dry, and bitter flavor, while a lower percentage is going to be way sweeter and milder.
Moving right along to Section 2, Dark, Milk, and White. Now, chocolate has an incredibly rich history spanning thousands of years. It really is a fascinating journey. As early as 3300 BC, indigenous groups like the Mayo Chinchipe people down in present-day Ecuador were consuming cacao beverages. By the time Spanish conquistadors tasted cacao in 1520, it was already this well-established, revered drink in Mesoamerica. But here's the crazy part. The solid chocolate we eat today, it's actually a pretty recent invention. It wasn't until 1828 that Coenraad Johannes von Houten patented a totally new process to press cocoa butter from cocoa liquor. And that single breakthrough paved the way for the British chocolate maker Fry's to create the very first modern solid chocolate bar in 1847. Fast forward to today, and the market is completely dominated by dark and milk chocolate, and they have incredibly different profiles. Dark chocolate typically boasts anywhere from 55 to 90% cacao and utilizes that cocoa butter for its smoothness, but it contains zero milk. None. Milk chocolate, on the other hand, drops the cacao content way down to anywhere from 10 to 50% and makes up the difference with a minimum of 12% milk solids plus a lot more sugar. This addition of milk, whether it's liquid, powder, or fat, actually acts as an emulsifier. This drastically alters the texture, making it far creamier and, obviously, significantly sweeter. Now, what's really interesting here is what's missing. White chocolate completely lacks the cocoa solids that give dark and milk chocolate their signature dark color and that classic flavor we all know. It is crafted entirely from just cocoa butter, sugar, and milk. Because it has absolutely no cocoa solids, some purists argue it's technically the least chocolatey chocolate out there. But honestly, its velvety, sweet texture makes it a huge, indulgent favorite nonetheless. But beyond just the recipe and the milk content, the actual origin of the cacao bean dramatically impacts the natural bitterness of the chocolate. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. For instance, the aristocratic Criollo bean is highly aromatic and surprisingly lacks bitterness almost completely. Then you have the Forastero bean, primarily grown in West Africa, which is super robust and brings that strong, classic bitter flavor. And finally, the Trinitario is a hybrid of those two, grown in tropical regions, combining different flavor elements of both. So the bean variety is honestly just as important to the final taste as that big percentage number printed on the wrapper. Okay, Section 3, Caffeine and Theobromine. You might actually be surprised to learn how caffeine is distributed across these different chocolate types. Because caffeine is found exclusively inside the cocoa solids, the darker the chocolate, the more caffeine you're going to get. Dark chocolate contains about 12 milligrams per ounce. Milk chocolate steps that down a bit, containing around 9 milligrams for a standard 1.55-ounce bar. And white chocolate? Well, because it has zero cocoa solids, it contains absolutely zero caffeine, none at all. So the crucial takeaway here is that while caffeine is definitely present, the true source of that famous chocolate buzz is actually a completely different compound called theobromine. Like caffeine, theobromine is a central nervous system stimulant found naturally in cocoa solids. It can elevate your feelings of alertness and positively affect your mood. Humans metabolize theobromine pretty safely, but, and this is a huge but, animals process it much, much slower, which is exactly why a piece of dark chocolate is highly dangerous and can even be fatal to our pets. Keep it away from the dogs, folks.
Let's move on to Section 4, the health debate. Now, the scientific community presents a pretty nuanced view of chocolate's health impacts, and we need to look at both sides impartially. On the benefits side, the cacao plant is rich in flavonols. These are linked to the production of nitric oxide, which actually helps relax blood vessels, improve blood flow, and potentially even lower blood pressure. It also contains polyphenols, which are antioxidants known to reduce stress hormones. But conversely, researchers note some very significant risks. Eating enough chocolate to actually reap those flavonol benefits often means consuming incredibly high levels of sugar and saturated fat. Furthermore, recent studies highlight that some dark chocolate contains appreciable levels of toxic heavy metals, specifically cadmium and lead, which the cacao plant unfortunately just naturally absorbs straight from the plantation soil. Moving along to Section 5. Global chocolate standards. If you look across the globe, what legally constitutes chocolate changes dramatically. It's actually kind of wild. In the United States, the FDA dictates that pure chocolate cannot contain any vegetable fats. Only pure cocoa butter is permitted. But in Canada, milk chocolate must contain a minimum of 25% total cocoa solids just to earn the label. Meanwhile, down in Mexico, regulations allow for up to 5% vegetable fats and even the inclusion of whey products. So what does this actually mean? Well, it means a bar legally sold as chocolate in Mexico or Canada might actually have to be labeled as a compound coating or just a confectionery item if you try to sell it in the US.
And finally, Section 6, tempering and tasting.
So if you want to work with chocolate at home like a professional pastry chef, you absolutely have to master a technique called tempering. This is a highly specific, totally temperature-sensitive process that essentially aligns the cocoa butter crystals. According to the Culinary Institute Le Cordon Bleu, for dark chocolate, you first melt it over a bain-marie, making sure the bowl doesn't touch the water below, until it hits exactly 45 degrees Celsius. Then you remove it from the heat and cool it down to exactly 27 degrees. Finally, you gently reheat it back up to 32 degrees Celsius. This precise thermal journey is exactly what guarantees your chocolates will have that satisfying, crisp snap and a beautiful glossy finish, rather than turning into a dull, soft, melty mess.
And when it actually comes to tasting, particularly with high percentage dark chocolate, you really want to balance its natural astringency. Because higher cocoa percentages reduce sugar and increase tannins, experts recommend pairing dark chocolate with very specific flavor profiles. So, a full-bodied red wine like a Cabernet Sauvignon, or fresh, tangy citrus fruits provide a truly incredible contrast. A little sprinkle of sea salt can draw out these hidden, complex flavor nuances in the beans, while warm spices like cinnamon or a cup of roasted coffee perfectly complement the intense, earthy, and bitter notes of the pure cocoa.
From ancient Mesoamerican drinks to incredibly strict modern food laws, the story of chocolate is just so rich. We've seen how a simple change in that cocoa percentage dictates the math of the sugar, the presence of caffeine, and the sheer intensity of the flavor. So, considering everything we've uncovered today about bean types, the nuanced health debate, and flavor profiles, what percentage of cocoa are you going to choose the next time you're standing in the candy aisle or melting a bar in your kitchen? Thank you so much for exploring the science and secrets of chocolate with me.